We begin in the quiet of deep time. The world, 900,000 years ago, was not the one we know today. There were no cities, no walls, no written words to capture memory. Only open skies, rolling plains, and the eternal rhythm of life and death moving across the land. Imagine standing beneath an ancient African sky. The air is cool, touched with the smell of damp soil after rain. Above, the stars glow with a clarity that modern eyes rarely see, scattered across a darkness unbroken by the haze of human light. The silence is immense, broken only by the distant call of night creatures, the low rumble of lions, the chirping of insects, the sudden flurry of wings as a bird is startled from its perch. This was the world of our ancestors, a world both fragile and vast. It is here that we find one of the most profound mysteries of human history. Around 900,000 years ago, something happened, something that brought our species to the very brink of disappearance. Nearly 99% of the ancient human population was wiped away. What had once been many tens of thousands, spread across valleys, rivers, and coasts, dwindled to just a few thousand fragile survivors. For more than 100,000 years, humanity teetered on the edge of extinction. This was not a quick disaster. It was not a single event like a volcanic eruption or a sudden storm. It was a slow, grinding crisis, a combination of climate change, shifting landscapes, dwindling food, and endless challenges that tested every aspect of survival. The earth itself seemed to close in around our ancestors, leaving them with fewer choices, fewer safe places, and fewer chances to continue. And yet they did continue. Against impossible odds, a small remnant endured. They carried with them not only their fragile bodies, but their knowledge, their resilience, and the deep will to live. From this tiny thread of survival, all future humanity would descend. Every person alive today can trace their existence back to that narrow bottleneck, when the story of humankind almost ended before it had truly begun. In this journey, we will walk slowly through that vanished world. We will explore the environments they knew, the grasslands and forests, the rivers and coasts. We will watch them rise at dawn, tend their young, gather food, and huddle together at night for warmth and safety. We will reflect on the dangers that pressed against them, the challenges of predators, of drought, of scarcity, and we will listen to the quiet echoes of innovation, the first sparks of tools, the beginnings of shared knowledge that allowed them to endure where so many others could not. This is not a story of triumph in the modern sense. It is not a tale of conquest or victory. It is a story of survival, whispered through deep time, fragile and uncertain. A story that invites us not to rush, but to pause, to sit with the immensity of the past and to reflect on the delicate thread that connects us to those who came before. So let us begin slowly, with calm steps across the ancient earth. Let us set aside the noise of our present world, the rush of machines and the hum of cities, and enter a place where life moved at a different pace. We will move with the rhythm of the seasons, with the rising and setting of the sun, and with the heartbeat of those early people who carried us forward. Tonight, as we drift into their story, we are not just observers. We are participants bound by blood and memory to the few who endured. Their struggles are carved into our DNA, their endurance written into the very structure of who we are. As we listen, as we imagine, we step back into their world. The grass bends in the wind. The stars turn slowly overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a small group of early humans gathers close together, their fire faint but steady, their faces lit by flickering light. They do not know the scale of what they are enduring. They only know the present moment, the need to live, to protect, to hope. And from that fragile gathering, we begin our story. To understand the collapse of humanity's ancient population, we must first step into their world as it truly was. The land of 900,000 years ago was at once familiar and alien, shaped by the slow turning of climate cycles, the drifting of continents, and the rhythms of the natural world. Picture an endless expanse of savanna stretching to the horizon. Grasses ripple like an ocean, their golden stalks bending with the breeze. Between them stand scattered acacia trees, their flat canopies casting delicate shade where herds of animals gather during the day. To the north and south lie rolling hills carved by rivers that swell and shrink with the seasons. In the distance, the outline of mountains rises against the sky, some volcanic, their peaks smoking faintly, reminders of the earth's restless fire beneath. The air is alive with sound. In the early morning, before the heat builds, the call of birds echoes through the branches. Flocks of small weaver birds chatter as they dart in and out of their hanging nests. Larger shapes cross the sky, vultures spiraling patiently on warm air currents, scanning the land below for the carcasses left behind by predators. Near the riverbanks, hippos grunt from the water, while crocodiles lie motionless in the shallows, their eyes just above the surface. Across the plains move the great herds. Antelope gather in the thousands, their hooves drumming softly against the ground as they move in unison. Zebras graze in tight clusters, their striped coats flashing in patterns that confuse the eye. Elephants pass slowly, family groups led by wise matriarchs, their low rumbles carrying far across the open land. And at the edges of the herds, danger is never far. Lions rest in the tall grass waiting for dusk. Hyenas patrol with restless energy, their laughter ringing in the night. Cheetahs streak across the plain in short bursts of breathtaking speed, while leopards slip silently through the shadows of trees. The climate of this time was harsher than our own. The world was entering one of its great ice ages. Though the plains of Africa were far from the spreading glaciers of Europe and Asia, the ripple effects of cold seas and shifting winds brought long droughts and unpredictable seasons. Rivers that once flowed strong shrank into narrow streams. Lakes dried into cracked earth. The grasslands that fed countless animals sometimes turned to dust, and the forests where fruit once hung heavy fell silent and bare. For our ancestors, these changes were both challenge and opportunity. A dry year meant less water, fewer plants, and weaker herds of animals. But it also meant the land opened up, new spaces appearing where forest once grew, allowing movement, migration, and new encounters. At night, the world shifted again. The heat of the day slipped away quickly, replaced by cold that crept into the bones. Fires, when they could be kept, offered warmth and comfort, their glow a shield against predators and a gathering point for kin. Without fire, families huddled together, their bodies pressed close, using shared warmth to endure the chill. Above them, the stars stretched vast and endless. The Milky Way blazed clearly across the sky, a river of light marking the heavens. Planets shone as bright points of steady glow. The slow arc of the constellations told the passage of time long before any calendar was born. The earth itself was alive with movement. Insects sang unseen in the grass. Herds shifted with the seasons following the rains. Predators moved in turn, shadowing the migrations of their prey. The rivers carried life along their banks, fish, birds, amphibians, while the forests sheltered monkeys, leopards, and countless smaller creatures. It was a world in constant motion, every sound and every shadow holding meaning for those who depended on their awareness to survive. To stand in such a world was to be deeply alert. Every rustle in the grass might signal danger. Every cry from the sky could mean a scavenger had found a kill, guiding others to food. The smell of rain on the wind could mean life renewed, but also floods that swept away the unprepared. And yet, for all its dangers, this world was also profoundly beautiful. Imagine sitting at the edge of a river as the sun sets, the sky painted in orange and deep red. The silhouettes of giraffes stretch tall against the horizon. The first stars appear, mirrored faintly in the still water. Around you, the air cools, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and smoke from the last embers of a fire. For our ancestors, moments like these were part of their daily existence, moments of stillness woven into the constant rhythm of survival. It was within this environment that humanity faced its greatest trial. The collapse of 99% of the population was not caused by a single catastrophic event, but by the gradual tightening of these conditions. Drought, scarcity, and the constant presence of predators combined with shifting landscapes to create a crucible of survival. The world around them, at once abundant and unforgiving, shaped every choice they made, every step they took. And so, as we imagine their lives, we must begin by sitting quietly in their world. We must feel the sun on our skin, the dust beneath our feet, the sounds of unseen creatures moving just out of sight. Only then can we understand the scale of the challenge they faced and the remarkable resilience of those who endured. This was their stage, a land of immense beauty, immense danger, and immense change. A world where life clung to balance and where the survival of a species depended on its ability to move with the rhythm of the earth itself. If we are to understand how humanity nearly vanished, we must look further back, into the origins of those who walked the earth 900,000 years ago. They were not yet the humans we recognize in the mirror today, but they were also no longer the ape-like beings who came before. They lived at a crossroads in our evolutionary journey, bearing traits of both past and future. Our earliest roots stretch far deeper in time. Nearly 7 million years ago, creatures walked upright in the shaded forests of Africa, balancing between trees and ground. From them came Australopithecus, the southern apes who thrived for millions of years in both forest and savanna. They left footprints in volcanic ash, prints that show a being walking upright side by side, much like we do today. From these early ancestors arose the first members of our genus, Homo habilis, the handyman, who appeared around 2.5 million years ago. They were small, with long arms and curved fingers, but they were the first to strike stone against stone, shaping sharp edges for cutting meat or cracking bone. The making of tools was not just a leap in survival. It was the beginning of an entirely new way of interacting with the world. Generations passed, and new species emerged. Homo erectus arose, a taller, stronger, more enduring traveler. With longer legs and shorter arms, they could walk great distances. They mastered fire, harnessing its warmth and its protection. They spread beyond Africa, reaching into Asia, into Europe, across vast stretches of land. These were the first humans to live truly on a global scale, and they would persist for more than 1 million years. It was among their descendants, or close relatives, that the great population collapse would occur. By 900,000 years ago, the lineage that would lead to us, sometimes called Homo heidelbergensis, or a common ancestor of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans, was just beginning to emerge. These beings stood taller than their predecessors, their brains larger, their communities more organized. They were shaping tools with greater skill, hunting with greater coordination, and adapting to harsher climates, and yet, this was also the moment when nearly everything went wrong. The Earth itself was shifting into a colder cycle. The ice sheets of the north crept further down, locking away water and changing global patterns of rain and heat. Grasslands dried, forests receded, and food sources dwindled. Populations that once roamed widely now found their ranges shrinking. Rivers that once fed life turned to trickles or vanished entirely. In this fragile setting, even small changes could mean disaster. A failed rainy season might wipe out grazing herds, leaving predators hungry and people desperate. A sudden cold snap could strip plants bare and drive animals elsewhere. Disease, injury, or famine, any of these in a small and scattered population, could tip the balance toward extinction. But there is also another truth here. These early humans were resilient. They had already survived countless shifts in climate, already adapted to new foods and new landscapes. They carried with them not only physical endurance, but the beginnings of something greater: memory, shared knowledge, and the ability to pass survival strategies to the next generation. Consider the making of a stone tool. To us, it may seem simple. One rock struck against another, a sharp edge appearing by chance. But in reality, it was skill, learned and repeated. The angle of the strike mattered. The choice of stone mattered. The ability to see, in a rough block, the sharp flakes hidden within. This was an act of imagination as much as strength. Teaching a child to see this, to feel it, to repeat it, was the first spark of culture. With these steps came other changes. Hunting was no longer only a matter of chance. Groups could cooperate, driving animals into traps, ambushing at waterholes, or scavenging from the kills of lions. Gathering plants required knowledge of what was safe, what was nourishing, what could heal or harm. Fire, when it could be captured, extended the day, provided warmth, and transformed food into new forms of energy. These were the first steps that would allow humans to endure, even as their numbers shrank. The bottleneck of 900,000 years ago tested these abilities to their very limits. Without them, we might not be here at all, and so, the origins of our survival are not found only in bones or tools, but in the quiet persistence of families who taught, who remembered, who adapted. We do not know their names, we do not know their faces, but we carry their legacy in our own bodies, in every gesture of cooperation, every spark of creativity, every story passed down. Their beginnings were fragile, uncertain, and yet from those first steps a lineage would rise that would one day write, paint, sing, and imagine. The seeds of all that was to come were already present, hidden in the lives of people who lived not for glory, but simply to endure another day. As we walk further into their world, we must remember every step we take on modern Earth is built upon theirs. The collapse they faced was nearly final, but the first steps they had already taken, upright, enduring, inventive, were what allowed the thread of humanity to continue. The rhythm of daily life, 900,000 years ago, was unlike anything we know today, yet strangely familiar at its core. For these ancient people, life unfolded in patterns, slow and cyclical, dictated not by clocks or calendars, but by the rise and fall of the sun, the passing of seasons, and the quiet cues of the natural world around them. At first light, as the faint glow of dawn touched the horizon, families stirred within the shelter of trees, shallow caves, or makeshift windbreaks. The night chill lingered, clinging to the air, as adults and children drew closer together for warmth. Fires, if they had been kindled, smoldered low, their embers glowing faintly against the pale gray of the morning sky. Some groups may not yet have fully mastered fire, relying instead on natural warmth and body closeness. But for those who did, it was a comfort, a constant presence that turned dangerous darkness into something just a little safer. The day began slowly, without hurry. There was no race to appointments or tasks. Instead, survival wove its way into every action. Adults moved carefully, listening to the sounds of the forest or savanna, their senses attuned to any sign of danger or opportunity. The cry of distant birds, the rustle of grass in the breeze, the faint scuff of hooves, each carried meaning, offering clues about food, water, or predators. Foraging was a central rhythm. Women, men, and children alike scanned the land for edible roots, berries, nuts, and shoots. They worked with patient hands, breaking soil with sticks or gently plucking fruit. This was not a rushed harvest, but a slow, deliberate search, guided by memory, knowing where certain plants grew, when they ripened, and which parts could safely be eaten. Alongside plants, small animals, insects, and fish added to the diet. Sometimes it was a matter of turning over stones to find grubs, or patiently waiting by a stream for fish to appear in the shallows. The hunt for larger animals was rarer, riskier, and slower still. Hunting required patience, cooperation, and silence. Groups moved carefully through tall grasses, their bare feet quiet against the soil. Spears, simple yet effective, were carried, though success was never guaranteed. Often, scavenging from carcasses left behind by lions, leopards, or saber-toothed cats was safer and more rewarding than facing a predator directly. Life was a constant negotiation between risk and nourishment. Children were part of this rhythm too, but their days were lighter, filled with play that doubled as learning. They chased each other through grass, threw small sticks like spears, or mimicked the foraging of adults. Their laughter carried gently through the air, but even in play, lessons were absorbed. The sound of breaking branches signaling danger, the shape of a safe fruit, the balance of carrying a stick. Through imitation, they prepared for the roles they would one day take on, their games echoing the serious tasks of survival. Midday brought stillness. The sun burned high overhead, shadows shortened, and the heat pressed heavily on the land. This was a time of rest. Families sought shade beneath trees or within the cool embrace of caves. Bodies stretched out on the ground, eyes half closed, conserving energy. It was a pause, a moment of calm in a world that demanded constant awareness. This rest was not wasted time. It was survival itself. A rhythm as natural as the beating of a heart. In these quiet hours, there was space for connection. Hands brushed against one another, children nestled close to parents, and small gestures of care passed between individuals. Grooming, plucking insects from hair or smoothing tangled locks was common, a sign of affection as much as necessity. Through touch, bonds were reinforced, trust was built, and group harmony deepened. As the day cooled once more, activity returned. Movement was easier and families ventured farther afield in search of food or water. The late hours of the afternoon were often the most productive. Waterholes, if nearby, became gathering points, not only for humans but for countless animals. Here, antelope, elephants, and predators all crossed paths, each approaching cautiously, aware of the fragile balance between life and death. For our ancestors, these places offered both opportunity and danger. The chance to drink or scavenge was vital, but always shadowed by the threat of ambush. Evening descended slowly, with the sky glowing orange, then deepening to purple. Fires were kindled again, where knowledge allowed. Flames flickered against the darkening landscape, offering warmth and comfort. The smell of smoke hung in the air, mingling with the scent of roasting roots or meat when food was plenty. Around the fire, voices murmured softly, words or perhaps proto-language carried between people, sounds of reassurance, fragments of meaning, laughter, or warnings. Though their language was not like ours, communication was essential, and it flowed naturally within the group. Night was a time of vigilance. The fire, if it burned, offered a protective circle of light. Beyond it, the night world stirred, the cry of hyenas, the distant roar of lions, the call of owls. Families drew close, children nestled against adults, and eyes stayed watchful at the edge of sleep. Sleep itself came in cycles, with some remaining awake to guard while others rested. Dreams may have stirred, images of the day's hunts or the faces of loved ones. This was the rhythm of life, repeated day after day, season after season. Simple, yet profound. Each gesture, from plucking berries to tending a fire, carried weight. Each moment of rest beneath a tree or laughter between children connected them to one another and to the land itself. And as we imagine these ancient days, we see that though separated by nearly 1,000,000 years, the essence of daily life, seeking food, protecting family, finding moments of rest, remains within us still. Our modern lives may be filled with technology and noise, but beneath it all, the same heartbeat endures, the same rhythm of existence that carried our ancestors through their world of uncertainty and survival. In the vast silence of prehistory, bonds were everything. Survival did not rest on a single pair of hands, but on the woven fabric of community. 900,000 years ago, life was fragile. To endure meant to lean on one another, to form connections that reached beyond mere necessity. These bonds were subtle, unspoken, but powerful enough to guide generations through hardship. We can imagine small groups, rarely more than 20 or 30 individuals, moving across the land together. They were not crowds, nor great tribes, but intimate circles, each person known, each child watched over, each elder respected. The ties within these groups were made not of words alone, but of gestures, glances, and the steady presence of familiarity. To wake and see the same faces, to walk side by side across rivers and plains, was to carry a sense of belonging in a world that offered so little certainty. Family, as we know it, was at the heart of this structure. A mother's watchful gaze, an infant pressed against her chest, the quiet reassurance of touch, all of these formed the first foundation of human society. Fathers, uncles, and older siblings shared in the care, for no child belonged solely to two people. The group itself was the guardian, each adult carrying responsibility for the young. It was this shared care that allowed children to grow, to learn slowly, to survive the long years of dependence. Elders, though slower in step, carried weight of a different kind. They were memory. They remembered where water could be found in the dry season, when certain plants ripened, and which landscapes held danger. Their knowledge was not written, but spoken, shown, and remembered. Around fires or beneath the shade of trees, their stories, however simple, gave shape to the group's understanding of the land. A gesture pointing toward the hills, a sound imitating the call of a bird, a lesson shared with patient repetition. These were threads of wisdom, binding past to present. And then there was companionship, the quiet bond that formed between individuals. We cannot know the depth of their emotions, but we can imagine. Two hunters walking side by side, moving in rhythm without speaking. Two women working to gather roots, pausing to smile as children played nearby. Bonds of trust were built in silence, strengthened by shared tasks and shared risks. To know that another would watch your back at the waterhole, to know that food would be shared when times grew lean. This was the unspoken contract of life together. Laughter was likely part of this world too. Children's games were filled with it, but adults, even in their struggles, must have found moments of joy. The play of mimicry, the pleasure of teasing, or the pride of a successful hunt, all could have sparked smiles and soft sounds of amusement. Even simple gestures, like tossing a stick to a child or sharing a bite of food, carried warmth. In a harsh world, these glimmers of light made life more than just survival. They made it human. Conflict, too, was a reality. Tensions must have risen when food was scarce or tempers flared. Yet groups that endured likely learned ways to soothe disagreements. A sharp word might have been followed by silence, by time apart, and then by reconciliation. The bonds of the group were too valuable to break easily. To leave meant isolation, and isolation often meant death. And so, cooperation was the greater path, reinforced by necessity but carried forward by something deeper. an instinct for togetherness. Around the fire, we can picture the most intimate moments. The flames crackling, smoke curling upward into the night sky, the group gathered close. Children pressed against mothers, hunters resting their weary legs, elders gazing into the glow with quiet thought. Murmured sounds passed between them, soft and rhythmic, perhaps the early seeds of language. Repeated sounds, shared meanings, laughter folded into sound. Language in its infancy would have been nurtured here, in these circles of warmth and light. The nights, long and dark, were softened by these gatherings. Beyond the fire, predators lurked, their calls echoing across the land. But within the circle of companionship, there was reassurance. A hand on the shoulder, a familiar face in the flickering glow, the hum of voices weaving together. These were not just survival tactics. They were the beginning of society itself, the earliest echoes of what would one day become culture, family, and community. In such a society, sharing was vital. Food was not hoarded but passed around, distributed with fairness. A successful scavenging, a fortunate hunt, even a handful of berries gathered by a child, all were pooled together. The group ate as one because to hoard was to weaken the circle. Sharing strengthened the whole, and in turn, strengthened each individual. This instinct, this quiet generosity, would echo down through the ages, becoming one of humanity's most enduring traits. Partnerships, whether between men and women or among same-sex companions, were built into this world. They may not have resembled modern marriage, but bonds of loyalty, affection, and shared responsibility almost certainly formed. Raising children, gathering food, hunting and resting, these tasks were easier when shared. And with time, such bonds deepened, offering not just practical support, but comfort. In a life so uncertain, companionship was a balm, a reminder that no one faced the world alone. Children were the future, and their play was watched with pride. Each laugh, each stumble, each small success was celebrated in quiet ways. Their survival was the group's survival, their learning the group's continuity. Through their eyes, the elders must have seen hope, a thread carrying their fragile community into tomorrow. We often think of these early humans in terms of survival, but survival alone does not tell the full story. They lived together, not just to endure, but to belong. Bonds of care, companionship, memory, and trust gave shape to their days. These were not just scattered individuals scraping through existence. They were societies in miniature, seeds of the human story we know today. As we drift through the memory of this distant past, we see how profoundly human these ancient bonds were. We see ourselves reflected in their quiet gestures of kindness, in their laughter around fires, in their sharing of burdens and joys. Relationships, then as now, were the heart of what it meant to be human. In the quiet flow of their lives, challenges were never far away. The world of 900,000 years ago was both generous and unforgiving. It provided food, water, and shelter, yet demanded constant awareness, constant effort, and constant resilience. For our ancestors, struggle was not an interruption to life. It was life itself, woven into every dawn and every nightfall. The first challenge was the land itself. Seasons shifted, sometimes gently, sometimes with abrupt cruelty. Long rains turned rivers into rushing torrents, reshaping valleys and filling lowlands with pools that soon teemed with life. Yet when the skies withheld water, the land hardened, grasses withered, and trees stood bare against the heat. During these dry times, waterholes became lifelines, shrinking slowly as animals and humans alike gathered at their edges. Tension hung heavy in the air at such places. Thirst drove them all there, but danger prowled close. Crocodiles waded in the shallows, predators stalked the margins, and sometimes conflict arose not from beasts, but from the press of competition. food was another constant trial. Some days were abundant, roots unearthed with ease, fruits ripe and heavy on branches, a carcass found before the scavengers had stripped it bare. But other days stretched empty, bellies aching, hands searching in vain. Hunger was a familiar companion. For children whose growing bodies required constant nourishment, scarcity was especially dangerous. A missed meal was not just discomfort, but a step closer to weakness, and weakness meant vulnerability. Predators were never far. Lions, saber-toothed cats, leopards, and packs of hyenas ruled the night, their calls echoing across the land. To walk at dusk or dawn meant moving carefully, senses straining to catch the faintest sign of danger. An ear cocked toward the rustle of grass, eyes scanning shadows for movement, the faint scent of musk on the breeze. These were warnings to be heeded. A single mistake could mean the sudden rush of claws, the strike of fangs. To survive was to live with this ever-present possibility, to carry fear not as a burden but as an alertness that sharpened the mind. Even smaller dangers carried weight. Venomous snakes slid through undergrowth, their strikes swift and final. Insects carried illness, invisible yet potent, sapping strength over time. Wounds, even the simplest cuts, could fester, turning into sickness without the medicines we now take for granted. In such a world, every step was measured, every choice considered against risk. There were also challenges from the sky. Storms rolled across the plains with sudden violence, lightning splitting the heavens, thunder shaking the air. Rain fell in sheets, drenching fires and chilling bodies. Families huddled together beneath trees or within caves, waiting for the fury to pass. Cold was as dangerous as heat. In colder seasons, when winds blew harsh across open land, survival required closeness, shared warmth, and constant movement to keep blood flowing. The mastery of fire, still uncertain and scattered at this time, made the difference between endurance and despair. Social tensions, though quieter, also shaped struggle. Scarcity strained bonds. If food was short, the instinct to protect one's own could press against the need to share. Voices might rise, gestures grow sharp. The fragile fabric of unity was tested often. Yet groups that fractured too deeply risked collapse, for no one could face the world alone. Finding balance between giving and keeping, between patience and anger, was a daily trial of its own. Migration, too, carried hardship. As landscapes shifted with climate, families followed rivers, herds, and greener pastures. These journeys were long, uncertain, and dangerous. Each step into new territory brought the unknown. Were there predators here? Would food be found? Were other groups nearby, and if so, would they greet with hostility or indifference? Moving meant risk, but staying often meant starvation. To walk was to wager on survival, and looming over all was fragility of numbers. We know, through traces written in genetic memory, that humanity itself came close to vanishing. Nearly 99% of ancient populations perished during this long, difficult chapter. Disease, climate swings, famine, and perhaps even catastrophic events pressed humanity toward extinction. The small bands that endured were not just survivors of their own daily trials. They were the thin thread holding all of human history from unraveling completely. Yet even in these struggles, life carried a strange calm. Danger was constant, but so was resilience. The people did not live in panic, for fear without end would have broken them. Instead, they lived with awareness, with a steady vigilance. Each day was faced as it came. Each challenge met with what tools, what knowledge, and what strength they carried. When predators prowled too close, they gathered in groups, brandishing spears, shouting and throwing stones. When hunger gnawed, they searched farther, turning over every possibility, adapting with creativity. When storms raged, they huddled close, waiting with patience for calm to return. Struggle was never absent, but neither was endurance. In this balance of hardship and survival, the essence of humanity was forged. The instinct to adapt, to cooperate, to persist against odds, these qualities were tempered by countless days and nights of challenge. Without them, the story of humanity would have ended in silence, a fragile experiment snuffed out beneath the weight of the world. As we drift with them through these trials, we see the resilience that defines us even now. Our comforts may shield us from hunger, predators, or storms, yet the echoes remain. The struggles of our ancestors are written deep within us, in the way we still seek safety in groups, still measure risk, still adapt to change. Their challenges were immense, their survival uncertain. And yet from their perseverance we exist. Their struggles, distant and harsh, became the ground upon which all later human stories would rise. Knowledge is never born all at once. It begins as a flicker, a moment of chance, a pattern noticed in the quiet of living. For our ancestors 900,000 years ago, innovation was not a leap but a slow unfolding, shaped by need, sharpened by survival, and passed gently from one hand to the next. The first sparks of knowledge often began with observation. A child might notice that a stone, when struck against another, broke into sharp edges. A hunter might see how bone splinters could pierce hides more easily than bare fingers. These small discoveries were not inventions in the way we imagine them today. They were recognitions, an awareness of what the world already offered. Nature itself was the first teacher, and humans were its attentive students. Stone tools grew from this attentive watching. What began as simple flakes struck from a core became more deliberate over generations. Some stones, like flint or obsidian, held sharper edges than others. Soon choices were no longer random. Hands reached for the right rock, struck at the right angle, shaped with intent rather than accident. From these choices emerged cutting tools, scrapers, and points, each one a step toward control over an unpredictable world. But knowledge was not held in objects alone. It lived within memory, passed along through the rhythm of teaching. Around fires, in the soft glow of embers, children watched elders shape stone. They listened to the sound of strike upon strike, the subtle shifts that told when a flake had fallen just right. Learning was slow, patient, and embedded in daily life. No formal classrooms existed. Every tree, every stream, every stone was a teacher. The use of fire itself became one of the most profound innovations. Though humans of this time may not yet have fully mastered its creation, they knew its power. They gathered from natural flames, lightning strikes, smoldering trees, volcanic bursts. Fire warmed them through cold nights, drove predators back, and softened tough roots or meat. To sit beside flame was to hold both comfort and danger, for a fire untended could turn against them. Still, step by step, the familiarity with flame grew, until it became not just a gift of nature, but a tool slowly bent to human will. Innovation extended also to cooperation. Language in its early form was taking shape, not the complex words and sentences we speak now, but a rich system of sounds, gestures, and shared understanding. A pointed finger, a warning call, a rhythm tapped on wood, each carried meaning. Through these signals, knowledge could travel farther than any one individual. A discovery made by one could be shared with many, and in this sharing, survival was multiplied. Clothing, too, was an innovation. In colder seasons, hides were draped over shoulders, not yet sewn but wrapped, tied and adjusted. The use of animal skins offered protection against chill winds, allowing humans to explore lands they might otherwise avoid. Over time, these coverings became more refined, stitched with bone needles, decorated with marks that hinted at identity and belonging. Even in their earliest forms, clothing carried both function and meaning. Knowledge also flowed through the ways humans began to shape their landscapes. Shelters grew more deliberate. branches arranged in patterns, stones placed to block wind, caves modified with thought rather than simple use. A home was no longer just a place stumbled upon, but a space crafted with foresight. These first shelters represented a profound step, the idea that the world could be altered, reshaped, and made to serve human need. Innovation was not limited to tools and shelters. It also lived in the ways people learned to work with one another. Cooperation itself was a technology of survival. To hunt large animals, they devised strategies, some driving prey toward waiting spears, others circling to cut off escape. Each role required trust, timing, and communication. Through such collective effort, they achieved what no individual alone could manage. Even death carried lessons. The remains of ancestors were not always left scattered. Sometimes bodies were placed with care as though honoring their passage. This emerging sense of ritual revealed another kind of knowledge, an awareness that life was more than the moment, that memory, respect, and perhaps mystery shaped existence. The beginnings of spirituality, of stories beyond the visible, were woven here. Every innovation, whether fire, stone, shelter, or ritual, was a thread in the growing fabric of humanity. Yet these threads were fragile. A single drought, a failed hunt, or the loss of a skilled elder could unravel knowledge, setting groups back for years. Innovation required not just discovery but preservation, and preservation depended on community, on the willingness to teach, to remember, to pass forward. This fragile but steady growth is what allowed humanity to endure where others faltered. Many species walked alongside us in those distant times, some larger, some stronger, some faster. Yet it was not raw strength that ensured survival. It was the quiet accumulation of wisdom, the layering of insights across generations. Each new tool, each new spark of fire, each new word added to the capacity to thrive. We may look back now and see these as simple things, stones, hides, fires, gestures, but for those who lived them, they were profound. They were steps away from vulnerability and toward possibility. They were the first signs that humans were not only shaped by the world, but could begin to shape the world in return. In these humble beginnings of knowledge and innovation, the future of humanity was seeded. What we now take for granted, the warmth of a home, the bite of a sharpened tool, the sharing of an idea, all trace their roots to these early moments. The story of human progress is not sudden brilliance, but a long, quiet patience, a steady unfolding across countless lives. And as we drift with them through firelight and stone, through the murmurs of teaching and the rhythm of shared work, we recognize something deeply familiar. Innovation was not just about survival. It was about curiosity, creativity, and the unending desire to make life a little safer, a little brighter, a little more secure. In that desire, we see ourselves, still searching, still shaping, still reaching beyond the boundaries of what is. When we step back from the daily rhythm of our ancient kin, we see them not as isolated figures, but as part of a much larger canvas. They lived within a world that was vast, untamed, and ever-changing. To understand their existence, we must imagine not only their fires and tools, but the boundless landscapes, the other species, and the cosmic scale of time that framed their lives. The Earth 900,000 years ago was a place of shifting climates and restless lands. Glaciers expanded and retreated, oceans swelled and withdrew, and forests advanced while grasslands spread wide. Seasons were longer, harsher, and less predictable than those we know today. Yet within these patterns of change, life flourished in extraordinary variety. Across Africa, the cradle of humanity, savannas stretched like seas of grass, dotted with acacia trees whose silhouettes broke the horizon at dawn. Herds of antelope and wildebeest grazed in numbers too vast for us to imagine now, moving in great tides across the land. Elephants, larger than their modern descendants, roamed with steady patience. Lions, leopards, and hyenas prowled, their eyes gleaming in the twilight. Each creature lived its own story, and humanity was but one among them, not yet dominant, but deeply entangled in the weave of the ecosystem. To the north, where Europe and Asia extended, ice spread its influence. In colder regions, mammoths trudged across snowy plains, their thick coats swaying with each deliberate step. Woolly rhinoceroses scratched at frozen earth. The air was sharp, filled with the howl of winds and the cries of birds circling above. Here, survival demanded layers of adaptation. Shelter, fire, and clothing became more vital than ever. For those who wandered into these colder lands, the environment itself was a teacher, pressing upon them the necessity of invention. Beyond the animals and landscapes lay another dimension of the wider world, the other human species. Ours was not the only kind to walk the earth. At times, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, and other close relatives moved across continents. They too built fires, shaped tools, and formed families. Some were taller, some stockier, some with features that differed subtly from our own. Encounters were rare, but they happened. Perhaps they exchanged gestures across a clearing, or perhaps they competed for the same watering hole. We cannot know for certain, but what is clear is that the human story was never a single line. It was a branching tree, with many paths that rose and faded. The wider world was not only about geography or species. It was also about time, deep, flowing, relentless time. Each generation lived within a narrow span, but beyond them stretched a continuum of millennia. Rivers carved valleys over centuries. Mountains rose and wore down over ages. The sky itself shifted, constellations moving slowly in the vault above. For humans, this passage of time was invisible. Yet unknowingly, they were part of cycles far greater than themselves. In this world, they were both small and significant. Small, because they were vulnerable, one species among countless others, bound to the rhythms of nature. Significant, because within their small hands lay the seeds of a future that would transform the planet. The wider world shaped them, but in time, they would shape the wider world in return. We imagine now their migrations, slow and steady, like rivers of people flowing across continents. They followed herds, searched for water, or escaped drought. Sometimes they traveled in small bands, sometimes in larger groups, always moving with the seasons. Their footprints stretched across sand, soil, and snow, faint traces that time has since erased. And yet in those footprints, we glimpsed the first global citizens, wanderers whose journeys would eventually carry humanity across every corner of the earth. The wider world also carried dangers. Lightning split the sky, igniting fires that raced across the savanna. Earthquakes shook the ground. Rivers flooded their banks. Volcanoes rumbled and spilled ash across valleys. For those who lived then, these events were not natural disasters in the way we define them now. They were simply part of the world's pulse, powerful, mysterious, and unavoidable. Each event left its mark, shaping memory, caution, and perhaps awe. And yet, despite the vastness and unpredictability of their world, there was beauty. Imagine standing with them at dusk, the sun sinking low, painting the grasslands gold. The wind carries the scent of earth and rain. Above, the first stars prick the sky, steady and timeless. In those moments, they, like us, must have felt wonder, a quiet recognition of something greater than themselves. This sense of connection to the wider world was not merely practical, but emotional and spiritual. The cycles of seasons, the rhythms of animal migrations, the glow of fireflies in the dark, all became part of their awareness. Over time, such awareness likely grew into stories, beliefs, and meanings that wove them more deeply into the fabric of existence. Though the details are lost, the seeds of spirituality and reverence for nature surely lay here, in the quiet communion between humans and the world around them. The wider world was, in truth, both home and teacher. Every shift in the wind, every movement of clouds, every change in animal behavior spoke lessons to those who watched closely. To survive, they learned to listen, to notice the flight of birds signaling predators, the smell of rain carried by distant winds, the hush of the forest before a storm. Their senses, sharpened by necessity, made them part of the landscape rather than apart from it. And so, humanity's journey unfolded within this immense and interconnected world. They were never alone, though they may have felt small. They were accompanied by the call of cranes overhead, by the low thunder of buffalo herds, by the crash of waves on distant shores. They walked within a living chorus, a symphony of life that surrounded them at every step. As we drift across their world in our imagination, we realize that their survival was not only about tools or fire. It was about harmony, learning to live within a vast system of forces, both gentle and fierce. Their knowledge of the wider world was not written in books or carved into tablets. It was held in memory, in intuition, in the shared awareness of those who lived close to the earth. And in that closeness, they carried a wisdom that we, modern as we are, sometimes forget, that to exist is to belong to a world much larger than ourselves. The rivers, the skies, the herds, the shifting earth, all are part of our story, just as they were part of theirs. The wider world was not a backdrop to human history. It was the stage, the teacher, and the companion. Without it, there is no story. With it, humanity found not only survival, but meaning. When we pause now, standing at the quiet edge of deep time, we begin to understand that what was nearly lost has, against all odds, endured. 900,000 years ago, our ancestors faced a silence greater than any storm, a thinning of their numbers so extreme that only a fragile remnant remained. 99% of their kind disappeared, leaving a fraction to carry the thread of life forward. And yet, from that remnant, the story of humanity continued. The legacy of that survival is the very reason we can speak of it tonight. The near-extinction reshaped everything. Those who endured passed on more than their blood. They carried within them the memory of struggle, the adaptation to hardship, and the resilience to endure. These traits, honed by crisis, became part of our inheritance. Every one of us today carries the imprint of those who lived through that crucible. Without their persistence, the great symphony of human history, our languages, our cultures, our dreams, would never have been written. Their legacy can be seen first in survival itself. At a time when numbers dwindled, when entire valleys may have emptied of voices, those who remained adapted with extraordinary tenacity. They found ways to endure shifting climates, scarce food, and constant danger. That ability to persist through extremes, to bend but not break, is a thread woven into the very fabric of our species. Even now, when we face hardship, that ancient resilience stirs within us, reminding us of what has been endured before. But the legacy extends further. Survival was not only physical, it was communal. The ancestors who endured were those who relied upon one another. Cooperation, shared care, and the bonds of kinship became more than social habits. They became tools of survival as essential as fire or stone. From this reliance grew the deep human need for connection. We live it still in our families, our friendships, our societies. We seek belonging not by chance, but because it was once the very condition of survival. The genetic legacy is also profound. Studies of human DNA reveal the faint echo of that ancient bottleneck. Across all modern populations, traces of that narrowing can still be measured. It is as though the entirety of humanity emerged through a narrow gate, leaving a mark forever on our shared biology. That shared ancestry is not merely science, it is a reminder of kinship. Beneath differences of language, culture, or appearance, we are bound by an ancient unity, born of survival in a time of near loss. And yet legacy is not only what remains in us, it is also what was lost. When 99% perished, entire stories ended. Songs never sung, tools never crafted, discoveries never made. Whole lineages of potential vanished into silence. We are the heirs of survival, but also of absence. Our existence is balanced upon the thin edge of what might have disappeared. In remembering this, we are reminded of both fragility and preciousness, the delicate thread that carries life through time. As generations followed, the survivors spread once more across landscapes. They left Africa, moving slowly into the wider world. They carried their resilience into new lands, facing new challenges, shaping tools, taming fire, and laying the foundations for all that would follow. Their descendants gave rise to new species, Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and eventually, Homo sapiens. The legacy of that narrow survival was not static. It was a seed, branching outward, giving rise to the richness and diversity of later humanity. We can also think of their legacy as a story of humility. For all our modern knowledge and power, our entire existence rests upon a sliver of chance, upon the survival of a few thousand beings in a distant age. It humbles us to realize how close we came to never existing at all, and it encourages reflection. That survival is never guaranteed, that endurance is never simple, and that the future of humanity is always bound to our ability to adapt and remain connected to one another. The near-extinction also left a more subtle gift, perspective. Though they may not have understood it, those who endured taught us by example that fragility and resilience coexist, that from crisis can come strength, that survival often emerges not from domination but from cooperation and patience. These lessons, though unspoken, echo across time and find their way into our own values, our myths, and our ways of seeing the world. As we trace this legacy forward, we see its flowering in every step of human history. In the rise of language, we hear the voices of ancestors who once depended on communication to survive. In the warmth of a fire, we feel the echo of flames that once kept small bands alive through bitter nights. In the tools we craft, from stone axes to satellites, we see the same creative spark that flickered in those who shaped survival out of hardship. The continuity is unbroken. Their struggle has become our story. Perhaps the greatest legacy, however, is awareness. We are the only species, as far as we know, that looks back upon such deep time and recognizes itself within it. To sit now and imagine a world 900 millennia ago, to picture the near loss of our kind, and to see ourselves as part of that same lineage, this is a profound inheritance. It gives us not only identity, but a sense of belonging to the vast sweep of life on Earth. As we lie beneath the stars, we remember that those same constellations shone down on the survivors. They too must have gazed at the sky, not knowing its secrets, yet feeling its immensity. Their legacy to us is not only survival, but wonder. They passed on not only life, but the capacity to ask, who are we? Where do we come from? And what does it mean that we are still here? 900,000 years later, the legacy of those few is all around us. It is in every word spoken, every hand held, every fire lit against the dark. It is in our ability to endure, to dream, to create, and to hope. We are not separate from them. We are their continuation. The line that might have been broken has carried forward into us. And so, when we reflect on their legacy, we are reflecting on ourselves. Every moment of modern life, from the simplest gesture of kindness to the grandest achievement of civilization, is rooted in that fragile survival. It is a reminder that history is not only written in monuments or books, it is carried in the quiet endurance of those who lived, loved, and persisted, even when the world seemed to turn against them. Their legacy whispers to us in the stillness of night. Cherish connection, adapt with resilience, and remember always the fragility and strength of life. For we are not separate from the deep past. We are its living voice. The story of humanity is not a straight road. It is a winding path through deep time, carved by survival, chance, and fragile persistence. Tonight, as we reach the end of this journey, we pause to reflect, not in urgency but in stillness. For what happened 900,000 years ago was not merely an event of extinction and survival. It was a moment that shaped everything that would follow, including us. In that distant age, the earth was restless. Glaciers advanced and withdrew, seas swelled and shrank, forests thinned and grasslands spread. In the midst of these shifting landscapes, our ancestors dwindled to almost nothing. 99% were lost, leaving only a scattered few to carry the thread forward. The world could so easily have forgotten us. The silence of extinction was closer than breath. And yet it did not come. This survival is our inheritance. Each one of us alive today carries within our very being the legacy of those who endured. Their breath fills ours. Their struggles shaped our strength. Their persistence flows through our veins. The past is not gone. It lives in us. When we take a breath beneath the night sky, we are breathing the same air they once did. When we look at the stars, we are gazing into the same patterns of light that guided their nights. We are not apart from them. We are their continuation, and so as we close our eyes and reflect, we see the delicate thread that connects us across the gulf of time. It stretches back through millennia, across generations uncountable, through campfires long extinguished and voices long silenced. It stretches across migrations, across mountains and rivers, across hardships and triumphs. That thread leads us back, again and again, to the small group who survived, who kept the flame alive. Without them, there would be no we. Their story reminds us of fragility. Humanity is not invincible, not destined by right to endure. We came close, so very close to vanishing. In that realization lies humility. All that we are, all that we build, all that we dream, rests upon survival that was never certain. When we walk through cities today, when we speak into machines, when we send vessels into space, we are building on a foundation as thin as a breath. Remembering this humbles us, but also makes our existence more precious. And yet, their story also reminds us of strength. For though extinction loomed, resilience endured. They adapted, cooperated, and persevered. They found shelter, shared food, and leaned on one another when the world pressed hard against them. From that resilience, all of human history blossomed. It is the quiet strength of endurance, not the loud power of conquest, that brought us here. That lesson is their gift. As we drift into stillness, we can imagine their nights. A small band huddled by fire, sparks rising into the dark. Children sleeping close, elders murmuring softly, hunters returning with what little they could gather. Outside the circle of light, the world was vast, filled with unseen dangers and mysteries. But within the circle of fire there was warmth, safety, and belonging. That circle was the seed of our future. It was not wealth or abundance that sustained humanity. It was connection. The hand held in the dark, the voice that whispered reassurance, the watchful eye that stayed awake when others slept. These simple acts were the pillars of survival. And in this way, their story folds gently into ours. We too build circles of connection, families, friendships, communities. These are our fires against the dark. Their survival reminds us to cherish them. As centuries passed, their descendants spread again into the wider world. They gave rise to new human forms, new languages, new tools. But through it all, the essence of that survival endured. It endured in the shaping of stone, in the kindling of flames, in the telling of stories. It endured in the bonds of care, in the persistence of memory, in the unspoken knowledge that life must be carried forward, whatever the hardship. Tonight we sit with that awareness. The near extinction of 900 millennia ago is not a tale of the past alone. It is a reminder of what we are, fragile yet strong, vulnerable yet enduring, dependent on the world around us, yet capable of shaping it in return. We are not separate from the deep history of Earth. We are its living continuation. Close your eyes now and imagine the sweep of time. Hear the rush of wind over ancient plains. Smell the rain carried on distant air. See the flicker of firelight reflected in eyes that looked much like yours. Feel the heartbeat of those who endured, steady, patient, unyielding. They are gone but not lost. They live in you, in me, in all of us. And as the stars rise above, as they always have, we remember that the universe is vast and time is deep, yet we are connected by the smallest of threads. A thread of survival, of resilience, of life itself. That thread binds us to the past, carries us into the future, and reminds us always that our story is not only ours, it is theirs too. So let the memory of their endurance be a comfort. Let it be a guide. Let it be a soft reminder as you drift towards sleep that you are part of something immeasurably old and enduring. The struggles you face, the uncertainties you feel, exist within a far greater story, one that has carried humanity through near loss into resilience, through silence into voice, through darkness into light. As the fire of this story fades, imagine its warmth lingering. Imagine the stars above steady in their watch. Imagine the voices of ancestors carried quietly on the wind, not speaking words but offering presence. A reminder that we are never alone. The story of how 99% were lost and how the few remained is not a story of despair. It is a story of continuity, of life that endured when it might have vanished, of a thread that, against the odds, carried forward into you. And now, with eyes closing and breath softening, we rest in that knowledge. The past is vast, the future uncertain, but the thread endures. We are here. We are part of it, and that is enough.